Anyone that has tender returns that they need to compare, a QS might cost you 1,500 quid to run a tender process for you or analyze some tender returns. With AI, ChatGPT, Claude at your fingertips nowadays, you can literally do it within seconds. And every single thing that I put into it, I can rarely find things that I disagree with in terms of the breakdown that it comes back with, the pricing that it spits out. You should be using this straight out of the gate with your initial appraisals. Now, where it gets really interesting is where AI and the tender process. I've had lots of conversations internally with Aura this week and with Graham and Richard, if you're tuning in. Thanks for introducing me to Claude, because I hadn't really used Claude before. I've always been a sort of ChatGPT kind of guy. But Claude, from a tender process perspective, seems to actually have way more insight and way more sort of, I guess, accurate, or be able to process tenders really, really well. I mean, ChatGPT does a great job, but I was blown away by what Claude did or does. So this is just a shout out to all developers out there, all architects, anyone that has tender returns that they need to compare and contrast. A QS might cost you 1,500 quid to run a tender process for you or analyze some tender returns. With AI, ChatGPT, Claude at your fingertips nowadays, you can literally do it within seconds. And every single thing that I've put into it, I can rarely find things that I disagree with in terms of the breakdown that it comes back with, the price that it spits out, albeit on one of the ones recently, it was coming out at £625 per square foot for a new build in Southwest London. The reality of that is that the QS cost analysis that our client has paid for actually came out at pretty similar amounts. So I don't really know what's going on out there at the moment, but who can afford to spend £600? You can't buy property for £600 a square foot in most areas of the UK. So to do a new build in Southwest London for that amount is just ridiculous. Ultimately, where Claude thinks it should be and where I think it should be is more like sort of £350 a square foot, somewhere around there, or ranging from 2,750 to 3,700. But I just wanted to show you the output, the types of things that you're expected to get from Claude. This is just some generic sort of prompting that I'd done with Claude, saying that we're building this type of new build house. This is the size of it, bit of blurb around where it is and what type of property it is. What would you advise on build costs at this stage? And very quickly it comes up with, this is the size of it. It's 3,983 square feet, so just under 4,000 square feet. And it estimates somewhere between 2,400 and 3,000 pounds per square meter for build costs. Lower end would be 2,400, upper end 3,000 pounds per square meter. Professional fees coming in at around 12 to 15%, which is typically what we would expect in our developments. Site infrastructure of utilities and ground conditions and things like that, digging trenches, that sort of stuff, 40 to 80,000 pounds, and then a 10 to 15% contingency on top of that. So that was the sort of generic, very quick guidance of typical costings in the areas, and based on the information that we gave it, very limited information. Now, that's great, and that's for any developer starting a project. You should be using this straight out of the gate with your initial appraisals to get some high level information, typical information for the area. Now, where it gets really interesting is where we uploaded the floor plans of the project into Claude, and the information off the back of that this is what blew me away, whereby within literally seconds, it's coming back and saying, oh, I can see you've got a basement, I can see you've got a wine cellar and a sauna in there. That means you're probably aiming for a high standard of finish. I can see that you've got 6 bathrooms. I can see that you've spec'd a fire suppression system. You've got PV panels on the roof. Like, all of that information is plucked out of the plans to then refine the costings to something which it thinks is more realistic for the type of project that we're doing. And that range from 2,700 to 3,200 pounds per square meter. And I think that is probably where the upper end of that, I think, is where it probably should be. But all of this is done in 2 seconds by providing it your drawings. It can tell that there's a complex roof structure with dormers. It can see that there's a basement with a wine cellar and a sauna. It can see that from the quality of finishes that are specified, i.e. some York stone paving, some standing seam metal cladding. Now, all of this helps it work back to a more refined costing. It's still given a range, which I'd kind of expect, depending on what type of tender and contractor you're bringing on board. Use Claude, use ChatGPT, throw it as much information as you can, even drawings. It's not just about analyzing a tender return in a spreadsheet and then picking through the numbers. You can literally give it planning drawings, detailed design drawings, interior design specifications, and it will be able to pick that apart and really refine its understanding of what the project is. And I think, ultimately, if you're a quantity surveyor nowadays, I think you should be very worried worried that these types of AI platforms can do what I've just shown on screen. And if you want any tips or tricks around kind of how to prompt, what to prompt, drop me a DM and we can have that conversation offline. But yeah, if you're not using AI, if you're not using these platforms to compare tenders, you're missing out. That was just sort of sharing one actual sort of price cost analysis. But what we are also doing now is taking the 3 or 4 contractor tenders that we've received. We're throwing all of those 3 into Claude and ChatGPT, and we're getting it to compare and contrast across the 4. So it will do a much better job, much faster, of comparing apples for apples within each tender return, highlighting the things that maybe are in one that aren't in another, areas that are significantly lower than others in certain areas and should be challenged. You can ask it to then give me a list of however many questions to go back to each contractor for clarifications and further questions. That could take a whole day really from a QS to run through, whereas AI is going to do that for you in literally sort of 5 minutes flat, and can easily present it in ways in which you can either share that with your team or share that with your client if you're an architect, for example. Yeah, it's going to speed up the whole process significantly.
If you got value from this video, make sure you click the subscribe button down below and ring the notification bell, because we release one video at least every week, so you'll be the first to get notified. See you on the next one.